Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Um, Thanks for your patience as we got started. We're really excited to see you all here today on our inaugural YANA Pacific Northwest event. We couldn't have had better luck in terms of our speaker and our moderator, and we're really excited to have a great conversation tonight. I'd just like to introduce myself and Jeff, and then we're going to hand it off to the people who are the star of the show tonight. I'm Sarah Sampson. I'm one of the sort of co-leads or of the new Pacific Northwest chapter of YANA. I think you all know YANA stands for the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance. It's a great organization, started as a nonprofit in New York City first, but has grown now to have 8,000 members, not just across the United States, but across the world. And one of the great things about YANA is that YANA has alumni and students from across the Yale spectrum, from the college, from the graduate schools, from the professional schools, and Yale friends. So you don't have to have gone to Yale to be part of YANA. We're open to everybody, and that's one of the things that I love about YANA. I myself am a consultant based in Portland, Oregon. I was a Yale College graduate, a history major. Don't hold it against me. I think and Jeff and I met on a YANA event, which I think is one of the ways, is just another example of how great YANA is. It's a great networking tool. It's a great place to connect to other people in the nonprofit space and the impact space. It's a great way to connect about new types of education and capacity building in the nonprofit sector and mission-driven work. And it's also focused on developing new innovative ideas. And I hope we're going to get to all those kinds of things tonight in the discussion. So with that, I want to welcome you after we have the panel, which is the main event. I also hope that some of you will stay and join Jeff and I and the rest and anybody else in the panelists if they'd like to stay to discuss YANA here in the Pacific Northwest and where we want to go with the chapter, what we want to do, and where we see this going in the future. So please stay for 15 minutes afterward. If you have a moment, we'd love to talk with you. Let me just hand it off to Jeff then, who's going to talk about himself and do our land acknowledgement.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and also very excited to have everyone with us tonight. Very excited about this panel. So I'm Jeff Cohen. I am also a consultant in the social sector. I work mostly in the education space, but also do just general strategy for foundations and nonprofits. And I wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement, and then I will introduce Sandra and get our panel started. So we acknowledge that today we're speaking from Seattle, which is the traditional land of the Coast Salish people, specifically the ancestral land of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Stillaguamish, and Muckleshoot people, and from Portland, which rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We honor with gratitude these original stewards, their history, and the land itself. So our moderator today is Sandra Medrano, who she received her BA in history and a certificate from Energy Studies from Yale in 2015, and she works at the intersection of economic development, philanthropy, and equity and inclusion. I had the pleasure of working with her for many years while she was at FSG, which is the firm I'm at, and while she was there, she worked on advising corporate business and foundation leaders on CSR, shared value, and philanthropic strategies that centered on racial and gender equity and social impact. And she's also worked internationally as well as in the US and in Mexico and Colombia. Currently, she's working in the corporate sector and focused on deploying resources that scale social impact and advance the missions of nonprofits and small businesses. So I'm going to hand it over to her. Thank you, Sandra.
Thanks so much, Sarah and Jeff, and thanks, Jeff, for that wonderful introduction. It's really nice to be here, to be with you all in discussion. I'm super excited to connect with new folks across the Pacific Northwest region. I'm based here in Seattle, and really just eager to jump into the discussion. The last couple of years, I think, have been super tremendous, like an unprecedented time. I think all of us are very familiar with how our own personal lives have changed, how our work in the social sector has changed and all of the ripple effects of COVID-19 have really just transformed everyday aspects of our lives. So this is a topic I'm really excited about digging into, and I'm excited to do it with really wonderful people who are leading here in our local community. So just to set the stage a little bit for what we'll be discussing, I'm just going to share a little bit of, what we've been seeing the last couple of years. COVID-19 and its effects have really been dramatically impacting the social sector and nonprofits specifically of all sizes. In 2020, 40% of nonprofits reported losses in revenue and lost 7% of their paid staff by the end of that year. Not all organizations were impacted equally. Organizations serving people of color, LGBTQIA+, and diverse-owned small businesses were disproportionately bearing the brunt of COVID-19 and its effects. And those organizations that are focused on community advocacy, direct service support continue to struggle despite the unprecedented need continuing to grow. And then in May 2020, the murder of George Floyd really reinvigorated a movement for racial justice. And that, coupled with the rise of hate crimes against Asian and Pacific Islander communities, racially motivated mass shootings that seem to be happening on the regular just recently in this past week, the humanitarian crisis at the US-Mexican border really brought to the forefront some of the very devastating impacts of racism in America, and has really reinvigorated a movement that's interrogating the ways that history is told in America, how systems are built, how our laws are written, how resources and access to education, to health, to justice, to technology are all distributed inequitably in our society. Technology and the acceleration of its adoption and access to digital tools have transformed and continue to transform how we communicate with each other, how we deploy resources in times of crisis, how we educate our kids, how we build community with each other. And all of this is happening while at the same time, we see new challenges and inequities within who has access and who doesn't have access to technology and its democratizing power. And finally, in 2020, we saw one of the most extreme weather years with record-breaking fires across the world. A lot here in our own backyard in the Pacific Northwest. I know my parents were displaced temporarily because of the fires. Heat waves and hurricanes are now a common occurrence, and experts only expect these events to really become more frequent, likely more destructive, more intense, more deadly in the coming years. We could really spend forever talking about these issues, but we're really grateful to have a group of folks who've been tackling some of these issues in their professional, personal lives, and really navigating all of the challenges of the last couple of years and thinking forwardly about what the future brings to their work, the social sector, and our region. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists here, and I'll start with Nick Hardigg. Nick has worked in the conservation sphere for 3 decades. For the past 15 years, he served as the ED for the Alaska Conservation Foundation, the Portland Parks Foundation, the Portland Audubon. At each organization, he's adapted its business model to survive and thrive during times of change, but no challenge has been greater and more fulfilling than adapting the culture of exclusive conservation groups to recognize and embrace real inclusiveness. Early in his career, he oversaw tourism operations for the National Park Service at the Grand Canyon and Denali. Nick received an MBA from the Yale School of Management, and outside of work, he enjoys biking, running, paddling, making sawdust, and laughing with his family. Emee comes from a family of Filipino immigrants who left the country during the Marcos dictatorship. She is among the first generation of her family to be born in the US. She graduated in 1995 from Yale College with a degree in molecular biophysics and biochemistry. While working at a microbiology lab at the University of Texas in Austin, Emee stumbled on a weekend catering job where she developed a love for precise work and an ability to really diffuse stressful situations. In 1999, she decided to leave the lab to found an event planning business, EJP Events. The need for inclusion and representation in events quickly became clear to her, and she realized that many underrepresented and marginalized people experience a lack of hospitality and welcome in the events world, and now seeks to change that through her work. She draws on the broad exposure to history, culture, and the humanities that she received at Yale, as her business now serves nonprofit clients, who include organizations such as Oregon Health and Science University and the Meyer Memorial Trust. She has served on the board of the Yale Alumni Association of Oregon and Southwest Washington since 2015, and she holds a certificate, and she holds a certified meeting professional designation from the Events Industry Council. Emee lives in Portland with her 2 children and her partner. And finally, Allie Yee. Allie Yee is dedicated to supporting the capacity of social justice leaders and organizations to create equitable and inclusive communities. She's got started in the nonprofit sector in North Carolina, supporting grant making at the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, and later writing about voting and civic engagement in new immigrant communities in the South at the Institute of Southern Studies. She shifted her focus to nonprofit management, pursuing a business degree at the Yale School of Management. She joined Apano Communities United Fund in 2019 as the manager of strategic initiatives, and then as the development and communications director prior to her current role as co-executive director of finance, operations, and development. She's excited about building a strong foundation for Apano's work and staff, and to supporting the organization and leaning into its values. So I'm going to invite all of you all to come on video, and I will stop the screen share if I can do that seamlessly here. And Sarah or Jeff, if you can maybe pin the speakers to the screen so everybody can see the group. And welcome. Really excited to be here with you all, to be in conversation on some of these really pressing topics, to hear and learn a bit about your experiences, and to really think about what comes next. You know, after the tremendous 2 years that we've had, what can we expect? What can we look forward to? What are you all thinking about, you know, as the future starting to look a little different? So I'd love to start with really hearing about you all as individuals. We'll learn a little bit about some of the work you're doing within the space, but I'd love for all of you to share, you know, what it's been like for you personally. What have been some of the most salient personal experiences in growing your own leadership or changing other facets of your life in the context of COVID-19, of equity and racial justice, and global climate being, you know, at the forefront of the last couple of years, especially. And why don't we kick it off with Allie?
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you for having me this evening. And yes, I've had quite a time, I think, and personally through these past couple of years, kind of parallel to the big transformations of our world. I had a lot of personal change and transformation. Right before the pandemic, I moved to Oregon in 2019. And came to Apano, and so I was kind of coming to a new community, learning a new place, settling into a new job. In 2021, I had a pandemic baby, so that was a whole new thing. And then in 2022, this year, I became the co-executive director, one of 3 at Apano Communities United Fund, which is our C3, and Apano is our C4. And so it has been a wild ride, a bit of kind of swinging from these big world issues, responding to the COVID pandemic, racial justice protests, the climate impacts, anti-Asian hate, to like very tiny, like middle of the night up with a newborn type of moments. And so I think the experience has really been deepening a sense of gratitude for the big things and the small things. And I would also say embracing change. I think my parenting journey has paralleled my kind of co-executive leadership like pathway into there. And so I've been drawing parallels from both. And I think in both sense, it's embrace of evolution and change has been a really big theme for me.
Yeah, I definitely feel like those big life moves, like literally a week before like shutdown started, I moved in with my partner into a tiny loft apartment, and I think our relationship just matured decades during the last couple of years. So yeah, definitely hear those big life moves. What about you, Emee? How's it been like for you?
Yeah, well, being a small business owner and someone who makes a living at getting people together to eat and drink, you know, it was just really interesting the last few years because you can't really do that when there's a global pandemic on. So I feel, I also feel gratitude for, the fact that a lot of the folks that I work with, work for, had a vision for continuing to gather people online and coming up with innovative ways for, for people to meet, kind of like what we're doing now. Using, there were lots of different software applications that our team had to learn very quickly. Zoom was just one of them, but, just Google virtual event software and you'll probably come up with 100 different things. And I've probably demoed all of them at this point. So there was just a very, I would say there was just a lot of learning, a lot of need for flexibility, and willing to just say, I don't know what I don't know about this particular thing, in order to keep business going, in order to keep people meeting, getting information out for our various organizations and clients. That being like the business side of things, I would say personally, again, being in Portland, and having an office downtown, very close to what, I would say is a lot of valid, protests and unrest that we saw in our city, just brought a lot of the issues that I think people read about in the news, and things that I feel like I had been aware of in my mind and feeling strongly about sort of like internally. I had been following Black Lives Matter since probably Michael Brown and Ferguson. But again, like you said, Sandra, it was 2020 and George Floyd that really, I would say, reignited or just really brought people, like everywhere in every city to just, the civil rights movement just got so much bigger all at once. And we definitely saw that in Portland as well. So I think all of those things, sort of personally and business wise have been on my mind, as far as recent events. And I think anyone who is working with nonprofits or working with events, getting people together, we're all keeping that, what, when we think about, oh, I want to be a good host, or, oh, I want to get people together, they're just longer lists of things that we really need to consider, that maybe people didn't consider before.
Yeah, I agree on so many of those points. I think here in Seattle, we saw a similar, just like activation. Like I remember being at home, like working away on the computer and like feeling the tug and seeing people getting out on the streets and starting to like activate, use their voice and think about some of those, like, not just think about it, but actually try to do something about some of the like awful things that were happening around us. And yeah, similarly, like how to build community and think about that in this new world has been something that definitely was coming up here too, I think, with mutual aid communities that were springing up as well. So definitely hear you that. I think we had a lot of similar experiences up in Seattle. Nick, what about you?
Thanks a lot, Sandra. Well, I've lived in Portland now for 16 years. I've been an executive director, and a couple of years before the murder of George Floyd, I joined Portland Audubon, and I had a vision of creating a truly inclusive environmental organization at a scale that I hadn't seen. But I also didn't recognize that I didn't understand what being inclusive meant as an organization. I mean, when you're a cis white male with a Yale degree behind you, and people are always telling you that you're right. They're always encouraging you to talk, or generally, or at least not telling you when you shouldn't talk. And but it's a yes world that you live in, and people aren't really sharing with you what they're thinking universally. So when I joined Portland Audubon, and we were like Portland Audubon, Audubon Society of Portland was our name when I joined, since 1902 society. And it just kind of spoke of privilege and an exclusive club, a society. And when we talked about being inclusive, everyone says that they are against racism. And very few people will want to admit that that they could be part of a system that's keeping people down. And so when you start, but when I joined Audubon, I realized, wow, why are the people of color in the organization not happy or not staying? And you see these data points of people repeatedly not staying. And you look at our events and you say, well, why do we have fewer people of color than the greater community? And you start realizing that it might not, that perhaps we're doing something wrong. You know, it's not because people of color don't like birds or don't like going out in nature, but Portland Audubon, as an independent organization, has some work to do. And then you start challenging that and learning. And so that's just been the real awakening for me. And what you don't realize as an executive director embarking on this is that when you start challenging the status quo, some people are going to be threatened by it. And you're basically tilting the tables that you have benefited from. I mean, there's been a downstream current moving me along for my whole career. But then when you start challenging people, you're being willing to tilt the tables in the opposite direction. And as an executive director, a lot of people give you the benefit of a doubt. They don't know what's happening in HR. They don't truly understand the finances. You make a lot of calls where you hope people will give you the benefit of the doubt. And you're basically saying, you know what, I'm willing to risk not having that benefit of a doubt anymore because you are no longer surrounded by yes people. And we brought the whole staff through training to start understanding what being equitable means, with myself front and center learning. And then people start really wanting change. And then George Floyd is murdered, and they start getting very frustrated and demanding change and seeing their own power to unite and push for change. And then you have people on your board who are like, why are you creating these problems? You know, you need to quash this. But the staff are saying, hey, we don't like our funding priorities. We want to tell the board. And the board is like, you're making all these angry people. So you're kind of stuck in the middle. And then you have the pandemic on top of that, and people have lost their sense of community because they're stressed, they're lonesome, they don't have the bonding moments to be together, they're fearful. Maybe they have their kids at home doing virtual school, and it's not going well, and your kids are suffering. And so you have all this on top of each other. And I would just say that it's been a crucible for learning for the organization and for me. And I look forward to sharing how we worked through that. I would say climate change took a big backseat. It was like survival with pandemic and having a vision of becoming inclusive that is threatening to rip an organization apart. And you know, so you're just you're just thinking, okay, focus and get through this. So that's what it's been like.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think you're starting to touch on some of the things that we wanted to learn more and hear more about when it comes to like, what does it actually look like? You know, as individuals, I think all of us were grappling with these things. I know I had a lot of like moments where I was also thinking like my own privilege, like privilege and access to education, like the Yale degree, privilege and access to be able to be at home and still employed, while friends, family, like half of my family was unemployed at some point, stuck at home with COVID. And like, you know, there's so much privilege that some of us got to sit with. And I think that was for me, like a huge, the last couple of years has been such a like reckoning of that privilege. But when you're kind of, you know, doing that at the individual level and then translating that to what it means to do that at the organizational level, And then, what we're seeing happen at the society level where everybody's, activating, everybody's angry, everybody's feeling something on top of all of these humongous like factors and macro things that keep happening. What's it been like, for leaders to grapple with what it means to come to grips with equity, and in particular with racial equity, which we know touches everything, like you were saying, it touches people's experiences at home, people's experiences at work, HR, workforce pipeline diversity, all of these things. What can you tell us a little bit more about what it's been like leading that sort of evolution and that reckoning within the organization? It sounds like, some of the board dynamics, some of the like sitting in the middle and kind of being responsive, but also navigating all of these dynamics. Tell us more about what that looks like. And tell us, I think, what's interesting that you also mentioned is the conservation space, the environmentalism space has predominantly been a very white dominant space, right? Not very inclusive of people from different cultures, different races, of class. It's a very elite space in a lot of ways, like you were saying, society kind of connotation. Tell us what it's been like to work in that even more white dominant space, and kind of navigating some of those management issues, and leading an organization through that reckoning.
Well, not that I've done it well, but it's been, I've likened it to bringing people on a hike in the woods when you're blindfolded, and you can't see the trees. So you're like, you're just walking and you're walking into trees. So it's like you feel really unqualified to lead. And you just learn that you have to depend on others. You may have felt before that people wanted to believe you had the answers, and you just start realizing, wow, I really don't know why people aren't staying, why we're having issues with retention, why people don't want to join our organization and participate in it as broadly as we would like. So then you're kind of you're changing mode from being the leader who at least effectively pretends that they have answers and maybe lies to themselves that they have answers, and you just kind of bulldoze through things and do the best you can, to one who's trying to get people to trust you and believe that they can be honest. So you need to build that trust in your authentic caring, and then trust that you're going to listen and do something about it when they may be just tired of talking about it and they don't wish to. And then you move that forward, and it's very humbling to just have a very different style of leadership. And then also the board might be like, this is not the kind of leader we want, like you're giving people a voice who are angry. And it's like, no, but just trust. We are building trust. We are getting things out there and we're evolving. But then from a nonprofit management space, it's like, okay, strategically, what do we do? Bring on new board members. You're not really going to educate a board member with the few hours they're going to give you a month. But if you bring on board members who are sympathetic and have an understanding probably greater than I did when I started the effort, they are going to understand what you're trying to do. But then it's going to take years of them on a board to get to positions of power. So it was like, okay, let's have a strategic plan and prioritize equity. Let's put in place term limits, which might take 6 years for people to move on. Let's build a power structure capable of change, but then also recognize that there are staff who also don't understand what the ED is facing at the board level. So they could still be blaming me for what's not going well, or blaming me for what I'm not doing well, because I'm learning. So I think that it is very dividing in how it goes. And I mean, one example of just what it's like, imagine having a 35 staff doing a strategic planning exercise of envisioning a future, and someone writes, we want people of color to be better represented at all levels of the organization, including the executive director. And then people put little red stickers all over that one. They're like, yeah. And you read that, your first response is defensive, like, this means that they think I can't do this. This means they think that they don't see what I see. And you start just internalizing it. And that was just really challenging. And I think but for me, I had to realize that it's not about me, it's actually about a vision. And maybe the vision, so what I ended up deciding was, I need to keep my eyes on moving the mission forward and not worry about my hold on power, because I was not going to be an impediment to allowing a Portland Audubon that could be much more inviting. And I might never be seen as the leader of that, and that's okay. I might be looked at as an ED who was only there for 6 years or whatever, but it was actually pretty exciting to think, this is a group effort. I'm not an expert in this, but I'm going to get it to a place where I can transition it. So I would just say it was a very different, managing through this was not like any other management role I had before. You know, being honest with humility, making mistakes, alienating people and losing power. But it was all part of understanding strategically what was required to move the culture of the organization. So,
yeah, those are really great examples. And I think, you know, the thing that really resonates with me, having a lot of clients at that time, I was consulting in the social impact space, also grappling with what it meant to like give up power, you know, as leaders, to rethink power structures, to rethink decision-making structures, facilitating people to put those dots on the whiteboard about like, what are we actually changing, both for the organization I was working with, but also for some of my clients. I think, you know, those are the big challenges that people were tackling. But this idea that like, as much as we want to do something today, we may not see the impacts of that until a week from now, a month from now, very likely like a year or two or more from now, I think is really important, because you know, organizational change and culture change takes a lot of work. Like, you know, it takes a lot of work. It takes, like you said, new people coming in, new perspectives, really changing structures, really changing like the inner work, like ourselves, to show up and behave differently within organizations. So I think there's always that balance too of like, what is the thing that we can accomplish in the long term, or what are we driving toward in the long term? And then what are we doing today to kind of remedy that? So I hear, you know, how you were tackling both of those pieces. And I'm really interested in hearing from Allie and Emee, how you all thought about some of that shorter term work, like programmatically and operationally. What were some of the changes that you all, kind of sitting more in the program side of the house, that you all were able to lean into to navigate some of these emerging issues, or navigating some of the organizational dynamics that you all were experiencing in your respective orgs? So why don't we hear from Allie?
Yes, there was a lot of pivoting happening, as I'm sure it was with Emee as well. So my organization, Apano, and Apano Communities United Fund, we unite Asians and Pacific Islanders to build power, develop leaders, and advance equity through organizing, advocacy, community development, and cultural work. That was our mission before the pandemic. It continues to be so today. But you might notice that it doesn't say we are a direct service provider in any of those areas we are focused on: systems change, policy change, community organizing. And we were in a rapid response situation. There were so many needs that we were hearing from all the folks in the community, from our partners. So we did step into things that we traditionally wouldn't do. We were distributing PPE, we were distributing gift cards to community members, we were distributing small business grants for small business clients we worked with, and distributing tech equipment so kids could access school, and a lot of these kinds of things that we generally weren't doing beforehand, but there was such a need, and we had a level of capacity that we could deploy towards that. And I mean, as we went through, right, it just looped us right back into advocacy, right? We were having those relationships, we were hearing the stories, it looped us right back into kind of our core competencies around lifting up important issues from community members and driving changes that they need at the policy level. So there was one example kind of that came to mind that was pretty exciting for us. Was we worked with a lot of Asian and Pacific Islander owned small businesses, and they were just getting ripped off by the delivery app fees, right? And it was not worth it. They were not making money, right? And And from there, kind of our advocacy director was able to take that up to the city level and the city council, or the, not city council, is it city council? I always get those words confused. Sorry, Portland has a funky government. The city folks, city commissioners passed that at the city level to cap delivery fees, and then that later became a statewide policy as well. And so that was like one example that was very like in the moment with pandemic. But since then, right, all of our issues that we worked on beforehand, mental health issues came up really loudly. It was coming up before the pandemic, but that's become one of our central issues going forward. Childcare, climate justice, all of these issues that we were advocating on beforehand became that much more real, and it just re-emphasized how relevant all of those issues are in that crisis moment. And so I think there was a lot of pivoting that we had to do to meet some direct needs. But again, that kind of loops back into deepening what our core work would be.
Yeah, I love that, how it all comes back to like these bigger structural things to continue to move forward on. Again, those things that take a lot longer to kind of tackle and make some change and move the needle on. I'd love to hear also, like, from the operational perspective, like getting even more tactical to the day-to-day, like what changed for you all? Emee, what have you, working with different kinds of organizations, with different kinds of entities, like what have you seen have been some of those operational changes that have happened? How has technology really changed, even further the way that some of, these programs, or how organizations are deploying some of their longer term strategies? Like, how has that changed on a like super tactical level, and with now tech being such a huge piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, we can talk about technology a lot, but, ultimately I feel like, at that person-to-person level, at that, a nonprofit, when we think about events, we always think about nonprofits executing their mission. So if somebody comes to us and says, I'm a nonprofit, I want, I want to have an event. Our first, my first question is like, why are you having this event? What's the reason? What's your mission? And, that was always true before COVID. And even more so, even more so after, because I think, with events going to virtual, going to hybrid, using all this technology, it becomes very easy for organizations to say, oh, we need this, we need, I saw this virtual trade show thing, and, I went to this thing online, and we need to, we should implement that into this event. And I think a lot of, what my role ended up being was helping people really just audit their, audit the event or the new form of the event against that mission and goal, against that, the program design that they were trying to implement, and just make sure those things were lining up. And at the same time, making sure that we were checking, each step of the way, all, every element that went into, whether it was 100% virtual event, whether it was a hybrid event, or as we saw going, later into, say, late 2021 is sort of really when, for us, in-person events were coming back. I know in other states, probably it was, earlier, but for, the Pacific Northwest and for our types of clients, it wasn't till late 2021. And, we're still seeing a lot of events still being held online, and some may even still switch. So we had to check every, aspect of an event for things like inclusivity. Is that registration form inclusive? Are you asking questions that would exclude someone or make them feel alienated? Are you giving people choices of how they identify themselves or how they represent themselves? Even if it is just, eliminating titles like Mr. and Mrs. and Ms., and rather, including an area where people could include their pronouns or write in their pronouns. accessibility has always been an issue, at pre-COVID for in-person events. And obviously, once there's all this technology involved, you have folks with low vision, you have folks who require translation as, in order to serve all your communities. Organizations are really having to think about, what would not just, saying, this event is open to all, but actually building an event saying, there's this, a phrase is going around that says there's a big difference between saying all are welcome and I built this for you. So I'm not sure who to attribute that to, but it's in a lot of people's heads right now. So, that flip side of it is, it's actually doing something. So when people say, well, what can I actually do to make this event more inclusive? It is things like offering captioning, for the people who need it, and offering sign language or translation, or different languages, that sort of thing. That's on the tech side. So you have all of these, again, if you are trying to increase representation, if you are trying to truly attract a diverse attendance to, what your organization is putting out into the world, you really can't ignore, building those things in right from the start.
Yeah.
And people need to budget for those things too, because, all translators, software, all of those things, are going to, they could possibly impact your event budget. But there is also, there's that business case for diversity, in that if you don't include those things and you do leave a lot of people out, as Nick mentioned, you start to lose people, your organization shrinks, you can't attract people, or for whatever reason, if people don't dig deep into these issues, they tend to, lose people who are doing those things. So it is, there's also the business case for, making sure that you are inclusive and not turning people away. Even some things as simple as food and drink, variable space, social distancing, it's still a thing. And some people feel, uncomfortable going to events where it's very crowded. So there are all these, pandemic considerations, there are racial justice considerations, there are financial inclusivity, of attendees, and making sure that people are, that you're offering, depending on what you're able to do, offering, sliding scale attendance at events. So, there's every line item of going into those tactical items has to be audited and checked.
Yeah, it's super tremendous feeling, like in terms of all the things that you need to now, or like we ought to be considering. And at the same time, like you said, it's sometimes just the simplest things that you're just like, oh my gosh, like could make totally the difference in whether or not like someone shows up, whether someone or not has a good experience. Whether someone comes back to patron your business or sign up to volunteer in one of your programs or contributes financially to an organization. It's those little things that really, can make or break things that now, we should be thinking about more intentionally. I'm curious, I want to definitely make some space for questions at the end. So I'm going to shortcut a little bit some of our moderated discussion and just maybe ask you all for some last thoughts, specifically on what you all have seen, or, based on everything that you all have experienced, kind of being in this space, being in this region in the Pacific Northwest. What do you hope, or what do you see are going to be some of those enduring shifts? What questions or what ideas do you think the social sector, or you yourselves as leaders and your organizations are going to keep grappling with? Like, what are your thoughts for the future? And maybe, let's see, Allie, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. So I think one of the questions, what do you think would be the enduring shifts for the future? And I think I had kind of a pessimistic initial response to this. And that was really shaped by, you know, when we were in 2020, right, there was so many things that felt visceral. That summer of racial justice uprisings and protests, it all felt so visceral. We could not imagine 100,000 people dead from COVID, right? We could not imagine ever going back from based on what we learned, what our eyes were open to. And then I think 2 years later, whether it's because this is just the way the tide goes, I think it's also like numbness. I mean, the news this week alone, just it can make you really numb. And I'm just reflecting a lot on how different it feels in 2022 than it did at that time in 2020. And so for me, it makes me wonder, I guess it's a little shocking in some ways how quickly we seem to forget the stuff that felt so profound. So I don't know. I feel kind of pessimistic about that, but I would say, what do we take from this? What I hope we take from this is really that change is possible. Like all these things that we thought were impossible, we got done because everyone was committed to it, because there was a shared vision for it, there was a shared commitment to do these things together. And so I hope we don't lose that. I think for the type of work that we do, that belief and commitment is really huge for us. And the other thing is that change happens at the grassroots level. Change happens between people, right? Who was providing mutual aid? Like who was out there helping it was neighbors, it was friends, it was like the people down the street, and even if you didn't know each other. And it was not the big national nonprofits that were, coming in with mutual aid. It was those community organizations that have all volunteer boards, no one paid, right? But they have the connections to the community through the faith community, through other, ways that people gather and connect and build those connections. And so for me, the importance of the relationships that we have feel really important. And in terms of resiliency for the future, for those communities that are most vulnerable still with all of the issues that we have been facing that came to light so starkly in these past 2 years, it's investing in that relationship. It's investing money in that capacity at that level. It's investing time to build those relationships and to nurture those relationships. And so I don't know if those things will endure, but those are the things that I hope will endure.
Yeah, I love that. Emee, what do you think?
There's so many shifts to talk about, but I think the one that we all, that you hear every day and that we all can agree on is that events will be hybrid forever. And there's a lot of pushback on that. So, like Allie said, it's surprising to see after, so many strong feelings and people in the streets and people activating to help their neighbors during the pandemic, that there is whether it's fatigue or, backsliding or whatever you want to call it, there's definitely folks that are thinking that COVID's over. And as we've seen, with cases rising, obviously in our county and Multnomah County, and really not knowing, what the long-term effects are of a novel coronavirus, you do see a lot of people who are still, they are not ready to go back to in-person eating and drinking. And then there's a huge group that is. So because of that, you're going to have, hybrid events for a very, very, very long time. But one of the offshoots of that, or one of the things that I've seen, is that this actually benefits a lot of people. And so with seeing all of these hybrid events, as an event planner, as somebody working in nonprofits, we're always surveying people and asking people after events, You know, what did you like? What did you not like? This is our first virtual, this is our first hybrid. And we started to hear a lot of, you know, a lot of feedback from women who just said, I really enjoy being able to get this continuing education online because it meant that I could pick up my child from preschool, or I could stay home with my baby while I was getting, you know, continuing legal education. So that, you know, not that it had nothing to do with the pandemic, but then you started to see this feedback, or you started to see feedback from people who were far away and couldn't travel, or people who had disabilities and said, I really appreciated not having to, you know, figure out a ride to this event space and go to this thing, but I could still participate. So, you know, adding these technologies really, you know, it added a lot of people that, you know, often, you know, get left out of events. So there are so many shifts that are happening right now in the event world, but I would say that's the biggest one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much like resonant with, you know, targeted universalism. We help those most in need, and then all of us actually benefit from those supports. Nick, can you round us out? What are you hoping indoors? What are you hopeful for the future?
I mean, I'm fearful for democracy at a national level, but I feel like that there has been a shift in power in Portland and to some extent in Oregon. I mean, in my little sphere of the environmental world, I just feel like that there is an evolution happening, that there are organizations that are coming to the forefront and having more power, and then other organizations that are sharing whether they want to or not. There's somewhat of a equalization happening that I'm excited to see. I mean, there are a lot of great BIPOC-led organizations that are getting funded and forming and having a voice, and that gives me a lot of hope. So I'm really optimistic that in some areas there's change, and that philanthropy also is shifting in the foundation world. So I have optimism locally and some fears nationally, but it definitely has been a time of change. So, and I think that I also think that hopefully there are other leaders who will make room and just say, you know, if you really care about something, then prove it. And maybe there are people who could do what you want to do better than you. So maybe your role should change. And that's what I have found being really rewarding for me. So, you know, we'll see. I mean, it's privileged to be able to speak that way, that you can take risks, but now is the time to do it.
I love that. Well, thank you all for kind of engaging in the discussion. I know there's a few questions in the chat. I'd love to make some space for it, and we're running really close to the top of the hour. So if folks in the audience and you all wouldn't mind sticking around for a few minutes, I think we can tackle a few of the questions that folks raised. So I'll start at the top here. A question for Emee. What did you learn about yourself as an entrepreneur, having to tackle all of these different challenges that you were facing?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, I grew up, I would say coming from an immigrant family who would be classified as low income, you know, we didn't have tons to, you know, growing up. I mean, I didn't know, but I feel like I had a relatively happy childhood, but, you know, we just didn't have tons of wealth flying around to run businesses and start businesses. So the fact that I started a business, you know, pretty fresh out of college was already, you know, a little bit absurd. So, you know, and I could go on about sort of my experience as why I'm an inclusive event planner, but the short answer of that is because I have an absurd background that nobody understands, so I'm almost never included in things. So anyway, but that brings for entrepreneurism, it was just one more thing, right? It was sort of like, oh, here's this pandemic challenge, you know, and I think part of, you know, what you draw on, you know, as a Yale College graduate, as an, you know, coming from a family of immigrants, just being yourself with your own identity and personality you do have to tell yourself that you can, you can keep going, you could apply for a grant, you could change your business model, you could talk to more people. And I think a combination of those things and just sort of trying to stay positive, is something that I learned about myself, is that I am sort of a ridiculously optimistic person.
Definitely resonate with kind of that immigrant background over here, and like it creates a little something in you that's hard to let go of, for better or worse.
It's hard to knock us down,
Yeah. Yes. Another question here, I think, for the group. So whoever wants to jump in, what advice do you have for a nonprofit looking to recruit more people of color when the first reaction is, wow, on the team, everybody is very white? How do you think, or how do you do this in a way that doesn't resemble tokenism, and instead focuses on how important it is to add different backgrounds, experiences, perspectives, and that people feel like it's a cultural fit? As a person of color, I find it easier to recruit others to a very wide organization and industry, wondering if there are other strategies you've used, what has worked, what hasn't. So I guess anybody who might have some thoughts on this or experience with some of these issues.
Well, I've worked on it, struggle with that a lot. Well, I did hire, if you have the luxury of hiring a diversity-focused recruiter who can help you understand how your systems can be. So there are certain things in the recruitment process that can be effective. So there's recruitment to get people to apply. Then there's the actual process. So during the recruitment, how do you signal that you really care and you're authentic and it's not tokenizing? That is challenging. But I think that one thing that we did that worked well was to hire recruiters who would help us and would show that we were really serious and investing. So we would also say, look, all of the staff have had extensive training and workshops, admitting that you're not perfect. But then when you do get people to apply, or if they come, how do you not have them find it completely oppressive, having everyone say, well, you're a person of color, what do you think? So you really do have to look at changing your culture to get people to stay. And I'm not saying that Portland Audubon entirely succeeded, yet I think we have rounded the bend as far as critical mass, where you're not looked at as an outsider because that we're so white. So I think it is hard to get over that hill. But showing genuine investment and commitment is really critical. And making time, especially a supervisor of a person of color. I mean, they better have training. They'd better understand some of the issues, even power dynamics of how you run a meeting. Like we do check-ins. We build on just sort of that emotional connection to see where people are at, and not kind of rushing, okay, these are the issues, let's get to work. It's like, no, where are people at today? And trying to understand where people are, so that you can have folks feel they can have a voice and be comfortable expressing themselves. So I guess it's a litany of challenges, both to effectively recruit and retain and have people feel welcome. And I would be happy if anyone would like to just chat more on resources. I would be happy to, having been in the middle of an organization like that and failed and sometimes succeeded, I'm happy to share.
I think all of those are really important, Nick. Actually, I worked in workforce diversity at my last job, and while I was in consulting, it was an area of specialty of mine. And I think just acknowledging that there's a lot of work to do, I think is really powerful for getting folks and folks of color to see that, like, there is that commitment to change, because it's not going to happen overnight. And a lot of us will continue to experience some of those things. To experience microaggressions. And I think the acknowledgement that that's real and that experience is something that is actively being addressed and kind of aiming to be eradicated within a culture is super important, I think, to really demonstrating that, like, change is coming, and it takes work and it'll take time to get there, but there is a true commitment from the organization. I think that's one of the most impactful things, beyond some of the very tactical things about, like, thinking about where you recruit from, who's interviewing potential candidates, how you communicate and engage with candidates, and throughout the entire experience, all are really important, really tactical things to do. But I think the leadership commitment and the authenticity to naming the issue and, you know, reaffirming commitment to address it is really key for that. Any other questions in the chat? Feel free to throw them on here. And any last thoughts from the panelists? I know we're a few minutes over, so I want to give everybody back their evening and let Sarah and Jeff kind of take us through the last bit of the info session on the chapter. So any last thoughts before we sign off? Excellent. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this discussion. Thanks, Allie, Nick, and Emee for sharing some of your reflections and experiences. This was really a great conversation. I think, you know, I'm really excited and happy that we're all connected. As a plug for the chapter, we're going to send around a survey just to kind of get folks' feedback on the session. So I just put that in the chat. Feel free to just take a couple of minutes to fill that out. But otherwise, just so much appreciation and gratitude to everybody who came to the panel, and of course, to our 3 guests here for sharing about their experiences. So I'll hand it over back to Jeff and Sarah to walk us through the last bit, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and thank you also to the panelists on behalf of Jeff and myself. It was great. I just took copious notes, which are going to be really helpful to me moving forward. I sort of joked in the beginning that I was a history major. Don't hold it against me, but I love looking backward to learn things about moving forward. So I'm really grateful to everybody today, and with their sort of honest and an open way that they shared. And I think everybody who is still on the line who would be interested in discussing the Pacific Northwest chapter further. I know we're running a few minutes late. Maybe Jeff, if you want to talk a little bit about what we've done so far, and then we'd love to, I'm going to try to let people talk if they have questions or ideas, but you could also put ideas in the chat if you have ideas about where we're going in the future. So Jeff, I hand it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone. That was a great panel. Really enjoyed it, and I'm glad what we've done, we have kind of started things going. This was our first event, so you know the idea is to try to continue to organize and put on things like this as well as other things. I think we're definitely still in kind of a sensing mode. We're very much open to folks joining, you know, getting involved, influencing, you know, what we do. And so we are trying to think about some additional events this summer. One of them focused on providing a working session / consulting for local nonprofits, kind of tied to Yale Date of Service, which is behind us now, but you know, sort of in the spirit of that, as well as thinking about a training that maybe we can connect with somebody at Yale to provide some kind of training on a specific topic like negotiation. So those are 2 of the ideas we're working on. We're certainly open to other ideas. We'd love more people to get involved and to take the lead on the folks who were on this panel and who helped organize this panel. You know, it was a good lift, and we're trying to have enough people that we can have events and kind of share the load, but also get a diversity of ideas about what would be valuable. So that's kind of where we are. We've there's been a small group of us that's kind of been meeting, I'd say every month or so, to talk about ideas and kind of keep organizing toward them. But I think Sarah and I are both happy to answer any questions that folks might have, and to include folks on the emails that go out. So just trying to really, I think this was a great start, and would love to keep the momentum going. And I'll put my my email in the chat in case anyone wants to get in touch with me.
Yes,
and Sarah, if I miss anything,
please do. I'll put my email in the chat as well, so that please send us a note if you're interested in being part of the organizational team, if you're interested in just coming to more events, if you're interested in, if you have ideas. I can also, if anyone would like to have ideas, I can try to allow people to talk. Raise your hand, I can put you up, you can ask questions, or if you have ideas about other events or things that you'd like to see that would be helpful, please don't hesitate to raise your hand now, and I can allow you to talk on the system, or throw something in the chat if you have an idea or a thought. I know we're running a little on the end time, so if you don't, that's okay. You can also reach out to us afterward. So I don't see anything, Jeff. Do you? I don't see anything, but I know sometimes hearing about things for the first time, then things percolate up later. So please, if we can leave it at that, then please, if you're interested in joining, if you have ideas, we're really open and would love to talk. There is a small group of us who are meeting, and we'd love to have more people join. So send a note to, and the survey also has a question to share future ideas. Thank you, Sandra. So send a note to either of us in email, and we'll get you looped in. That would be great. I guess then I would just like to, from the bottom of my heart, say thank you to Sandra and all of the panelists again, who really did a fantastic job. Couldn't have asked for a better inaugural event. And I look forward to, I feel like we really kicked this off in a great way. And I look forward to future events also, where we'll have a lot of chance to talk and meet each other and do some networking, I hope too. Thank you so much, Jeff. Any last words?
Oh, that's all. Just would echo that, and excited to meet and continue to do these events in the future, and hope to continue to have the conversation with folks.
Thanks so much. So we'll let everybody go. Have a great night. Thanks again. See you at the next event.
Have a great night. Really.